I want to begin this morning by sharing my profound gratitude. Tate, Alec, and I are so very thankful to be here with you. We felt a special connection with Christ Church the moment that we met the search committee, and that feeling only strengthened over time. I want to thank the search committee, Jean and Paul in particular, for their thoughtfulness and for their recommendation. I also want to be sure to thank the vestry for calling us. I'm humbled, and I absolutely look forward to our time together. But it's not lost on me, and I bet it's not lost on you, that we're meeting each other during such a consequential moment in history. I'm not officiating this morning because of a travel quarantine. Many of us haven't gathered within the walls of our church since mid-March, 7 months. Who would have thought? These months have also involved long overdue reckoning around issues of racial injustice. So much work is still ahead of us. And then, of course, in case you missed the memo, there's a presidential election next month. There's a lot to try and make sense of right now, a lot to take in. Someone recently shared that they feel as if their grip is slipping, that they're inching towards the end of their rope, and they know it's happening, they can feel it, but they can't articulate precisely why. On a lighter note, someone else recently said to me, "What a long year this week has been." I laughed, but the words resonated. Some weeks have felt like years. And yet, even in the midst of this complicated time, we've still been living and working and learning. One great lesson these months have taught me is this: it matters how we treat each other. Whether we're protecting one another from this virus, living out the truth that Black lives matter, honoring the dignity of people with different political opinions than our own, we have responsibilities to each other. We depend on each other. Dr. King's words have been echoing around in my mind lately. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. He wrote in his book, Why We Can't Wait. Later that same year, during a speech in St. Louis, he famously said, "We must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or perish together as fools." We are connected. We matter to one another. We cannot escape each other. Hold that in your mind for a moment. As some of you know, I was born and raised in Louisiana. I spent the past 6 years working on the staff of Bishop Morris Thompson in New Orleans. Every morning, I drove down St. Charles Avenue, passing streetcars, Audubon Park, plenty of Mardi Gras trees, which are trees that stay covered in beads year-round. Just before turning into the parking lot, I would drive past a synagogue with a sign up front that read, "If I am only for myself, what am I?" Those words became a prayer for me. In South Louisiana, we jokingly celebrated 4 seasons. There's hurricane season, which, by the way, let's be sure to pray for those affected by Hurricane Delta this weekend. It's been a terrible year for hurricanes on the Gulf Coast. But then when fall comes, there's Saint season, followed by Mardi Gras, then crawfish season. I'm not overstating it when I say that the people of South Louisiana look for something to celebrate all year long. One of the life lessons that Louisiana taught me, this is going to sound funny, but I promise it ties to the gospel, is that the very best parties include absolutely everyone. Whether you're at Mardi Gras or Jazz Fest or just at your neighbor's crawfish boil, you tend to find yourself surrounded by a tapestry of people gathered together to celebrate something, anything. And your invitation isn't dependent upon your race or your income or your sexual orientation or your political leanings. Someone in a suit shares a laugh with someone wearing a costume. Folks who don't look like they have much in common find themselves dancing together, singing along to When the Saints Go Marching In. New Orleans has a long way to go on many issues. I'm not going to deny that. But its sense of community gave me a glimpse into what God's kingdom looks like. People of all colors and accents and backgrounds coming together to share hope and love and joy. I truly believe that everyone is invited to God's party. Everyone is included in God's kingdom. There are no exceptions to that. Which brings us to Matthew's gospel this morning. As you'll see, it gets a bit complicated. So I want to start with this reminder. We'll circle back to it in a moment. Jesus is much more prone to associate God with a party, a banquet, a feast, than as a judge who sends some to heaven and others to hell. Most of us aren't taught that when we're young, but it's true. And in fact, when Jesus does allude to judgment, he tends to be very particular. For instance, towards the end of Matthew 25, Jesus describes a king sorting sheep from goats. But if you pay attention, what separates the sheep from the goats, it's not whether or not they followed all the rules, whether or not they went to church every Sunday. It's how they treated the poor. Isn't that interesting? So let's start with that. Jesus tells us over and over again that being in God's presence is akin to being at a banquet, a feast, a party. Here's the story. A king is throwing a wedding party for his son, but those invited, whom we might call the chosen or the worthy, they don't show up, which makes the king angry. You can read about his reaction for yourself. But ultimately, the king sends out another invitation, this time to everyone. So they go out into the streets and they gather everyone whom they can find, the good and the bad, Matthew says. And the wedding hall is filled with all sorts of people. That'd be a great message if the story ended there. Here's where things get strange. We learn that one of the guests shows up and is not dressed properly. So the king responds by sending him bound hand and foot into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's quite the punishment, I would say, for a sartorial offense. Catches me off guard every time. However, Matthew goes on to use this threat 5 more times in his gospel. It's only found 1.5 more times in the whole rest of the New Testament. I'll give you extra credit if you can find that half reference. There's a few ways we can try to unpack what's going on here, but here's what I want to hone in on this morning. Before becoming a follower of Jesus, we believe the author of Matthew's gospel was Jewish. As a new Jewish Christian, scholars tell us that Matthew felt rejected by the community that he'd grown up with. So throughout his writing, he tends to make pointed references towards them. He believes they excluded him. In his mind, they've hurt him. That's one way for us to try to explain the second paragraph, that Matthew's grinding his axe a bit, taking a thinly veiled shot at people who told him he was no longer invited to their party. Now, it takes some thought and some study to get there, and you may come up with your own conclusions about what's happening here in this passage. But on a personal level, I get what Matthew's insinuating. This is not my best look, but I understand his impulse to want to say, I'm right, you're wrong, and I never really needed you around anyway. I've thought about what it would be like to say what I really want to say. Maybe you have too, to dismiss those people whom I have felt dismissed by. This has never served me well, by the way, but I think it's a very human urge. And then, of course, on a much broader level, our society is constantly doing a version of this, trying to establish who's in and who's out, who belongs, who doesn't, who's worthy, who's not. The worlds of politics and religion are particularly guilty. We'll find a way to exclude people based on just about anything. Race, sexual orientation, political party, religion, what country you're from, you name it. We've become really skilled at drawing lines in the sand. But here's the thing. It has never been our job to send out the invitations. We're not the ones who decide who's worthy. And if you have even a casual knowledge of what Jesus was all about, you know where he stands. In God's kingdom, everyone's included. In God's eyes, we're all precious. We're all worthy. Our job is to accept the invitation and then to learn how to share in the celebration, making sure that the circle continues to expand, that more and more people can see themselves represented on the guest list. In the coming weeks here at Christ Church, you're going to hear me talk a lot about stewardship and about why I hope that giving to Christ Church matters to you. One of the reasons that my family will pledge as generously as we can is that we believe that Christ Church has a unique ability to invite more people to God's party. That's the great task for us here at Christ Church. We have a lot of work yet to do, but it should be a central piece of our vision to show others what Dr. King's network of mutuality looks like, to show Capitol Hill how we can live together as a community of brothers and sisters. It's been a strange year. For many, it's been a painful year. Normal is not going to return overnight. We need each other right now. And we need to continue making sure that all of God's people feel welcome in our beloved community. In the name of God,